You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynne Moser. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Headlines today, Friday, the 24th of August. 3 accused of organised child abuse in Burton. Culloden man caught with over 400 child porn pictures. Injured UK serviceman returns to Afghanistan. Muslim boxing champion jailed for intimidation in sex abuse case. Report from Nick Griffin, MEP. Egypt and Iran, busy friends for necessity. Thought for the day, the rise of hate crimes. And finally, coup, the Bermuda Triangle. UK news. 3 accused of organised abuse of child in Burton. Yasser Rasool, aged 24, has been charged with the indecent assault of a 13-year-old girl on 3 separate occasions. Nicola Martin, in whose home the alleged offences took place, was charged with, alongside Mohammed Sahir, aged 24, with arranging or facilitating the commissioning of a child sex offence. All deny the charges and have been released on bail as the case is adjourned until the 4th of October for committal proceedings to the Crown Court. A Culloden man caught with over 400 child porn pictures and videos. Brian Haswell, 34, of Culloden, pleaded guilty to extremely serious offences involving child pornography. Over 400 pictures and videos of children as young as 1 year old engaging in sexual activity with adults were found during a police investigation. Sentencing was deferred until October the 4th again to allow for reports. Haswell has been placed on the Sex Offenders Register. Colour Sergeant Thomas O'Donnell was seriously wounded when a determined sniper shattered his left knee in 2010. In Afghanistan he was told he would probably lose the leg. When he returned to the UK, medical staff told him the leg could be saved, but he would never soldier again. When he learnt of his daughter's engagement, he became determined to walk her down the aisle. With the help of his physiotherapists, he did just that and more. He is now back in uniform and will return to Helmand Province later this year alongside his son, who has joined the regiment. The Lancashire Telegraph reports European Boxing Federation British lightweight champion Shakeeb Ali, 20, from Blackburn, was jailed for intimidating a witness in a child sex abuse case. Ali subjected his teenage victim to threats of violence and intimidation after engineering several meetings. Ali was acting to protect a relative who had been accused of orally raping a girl. Ali repeatedly put the teenager under pressure to go into the police station to change his evidence and say the girl had lied. Ali texted the teenager saying, "I feel like ripping your head off," and other threatening messages. Ali admitted conspiracy to pervert the course of justice and was sentenced to 12 months in a young offenders institution. Those close to Ali are said to regard him as a national asset, and Ali's former coach Yaqub Hussain MBE has said, "I'm really sad to hear Shakeeb has been sent to prison, but he has obviously done something wrong." Ali's current coach Jason Curtis said, "We are absolutely devastated Shakeeb has been sent to prison. We just didn't expect it. We were led to believe he would get a community sentence, so we were not prepared for him to go inside at all. It was all over helping a family member." A World at 8 reporter comments, "This is the sort of attitude our people should not have towards our own. How can we stop Muslim sexual abuse of underage girls if non-Muslims support them? Another point, how come a young offenders institution? I thought these were for under 18 years. Doesn't that record get wiped when finished? If so, it proves that if you are Muslim and a so-called sports asset, you can get away without doing proper time for your crime." I give you a report from Nick Griffin, MEP, in which he discusses the reception of his report on what lies behind the English Defence League.
The reaction so far to my study of neocon warmongering and Zionist manipulation of naive nationalists has been very interesting. What lies behind the English Defence League has been covered in articles in The Guardian and in The Telegraph. In both cases, the authors inadvertently shed more light on their own motives than on anything else. The Guardian featured a piece by Matthew Goodwin, who all too predictably called it a conspiracy theory. As I pointed out on Twitter in my initial response, the term is as inaccurate and biased as Goodwin's wishful thinking analysis of nationalism. The phenomenon I have documented is not a conspiracy, because most of those involved are completely open about what they're doing, nor is it a theory, so much as an extensive collection of easily checkable facts. The Telegraph's contribution was from one of its young conservative bloggers, Ed West. No relation, as far as I know, to Fred West. Ed only murders the truth. Hence he decried my study as anti-Semitic, completely ignoring in doing so great chunks of my work in which I'm at pains to point out that criticism of sections of the broad spectrum of Zionism is no more anti-Jewish than criticism of, for example, the great train robbers is anti-English. Indeed, Mr. West's own piece, in misrepresenting my message, veers very close to anti-Semitism itself, revisiting and reviving, as it does, anti-Jewish stereotypes and putting words and opinions into my mouth. Goodwin and West come from different ends of the established political spectrum. Goodwin from the left and West from the Tory right. And both clearly see the British National Party as uniquely dangerous to their worldview and the interests of their patrons. Hence, both parrot the desperately tired and 2 years out of date fantasy that the party is over, despite all the clear evidence to the contrary. Intriguingly, both men are also guilty of serious academic and journalistic dishonesty, for both fail to disclose their personal interests and involvement in the very interest subject under discussion. While Goodwin poses as a social scientist, an unbiased researcher, he is in fact closely associated with the state-backed far-left thugs of Hope Not Hate. He has pocketed large amounts of taxpayers' money, courtesy of the Labour Home Office, the Equalities Commission, the Institute of Community Cohesion, the Institute for Public Policy Research, and the EU's Ariadne network. He who pays the piper calls the tune, so Dr. Goodwin's bought and paid for opinions are, to put it mildly, unreliable. He has also collaborated with Nothing British, the anti-BNP smear machine created and run as a project of the globalist Liberal Tory Policy Exchange think tank, now merged with the Henry Jackson Society, which of course emerges in my study as a key player in the neocon war of ideas by which the people I expose are trying to soften us up for a real war in the interests of their paymasters. This is the point at which left-wing Goodwin meets right-wing Ed West, who happily describes himself as a colleague of the Henry Jackson Society's Douglas Murray and shares pro-Israeli panel appearances with other spokesmen from the same stable. There is just a possibility that West, who in his thoroughly bitchy scratch-your-eyes-out article online did at least link directly to my study, was actually playing a game on behalf of his friends at the pro-Israel peace lobby group Yashad and the Board of Deputies, who clearly do genuinely disagree with the ultra-Zionist extremists exposed in my document. Perhaps he just wanted the people to read it, but had to cover himself by slagging me off. That, however, is perilously close to being a mini conspiracy theory, so perhaps the simpler explanation is that young Catholic boy Ed West shares the thoroughly warped priorities of the self-obsessed upper-class homosexual clique that have made the Policy Exchange Network a powerful voice for hostility and even war against anyone or anything that does not share their enthusiasm for gay rights, principally Muslims, and Putin's Russia. This, rather than enthusiasm for capitalism or Israel, is the starting point of the political journey that turns these elegant young Gentiles into Zionists and critics of Islam as a threat to multiracial integration and gay rights. Largely recruited at Cambridge University, their personal tendencies and sympathies have led them to a position that is ironically strikingly similar to the blunt Burgess Philby McLean communist spy ring of the earlier Cold War, except that the earlier set were left-wing traitors to Britain on behalf of the communist elite then ruling Russia, whereas Douglas Murray and his fellows are working on behalf of the corporate looters of Britain's Commonwealth, the American military-industrial complex, and Israel's Likud party. The Henry Jackson Society was founded in 2005 at Cambridge University by Dr. Alan Mendoza, who remains its executive director. Dr. Mendoza is also chief advisor to the all-party parliamentary group on Homeland Security and director of the Friends of Israel Initiative UK and also of the Israeli Diaspora Trust. The nakedly neoconservative Henry Jackson Society is credited with influencing the foreign policy decisions of Cameron and William Hague, who for a long time shared a flat with openly gay MP Alan Duncan, the oil industry bigwig who turned up as the man running Number 10's war effort against Libya. On the subject of neocon warmongers sharing flats with gays, One of the signatories to the Henry Jackson Society, and the darling of its scribblers, who are busy touting him as a future leader of the Tory party, is Michael Gove. Before settling down to conventional married life, Gove lived for several years with Nick Bowles, the Oxford University gay neocon who founded Policy Exchange in 2002. Bowles also went on to become an influential Tory MP, though he was recently taken down a peg or two when it emerged that he'd used taxpayers' money to learn Hebrew, the better to converse with his current partner, who he met on an all-expenses-paid trip to Israel. Honestly, I'm not making any of this up. Completing the happy home at the time was Ivan Matto, who made a fortune selling mortgages to fellow gays before going on to become a key member of the Notting Hill set that organised David Cameron's liberal hijacking of the Tory party. I've really got nothing against gays. What they do in private is entirely their own affair. But when their network becomes a sort of self-serving Freemasonry which promotes their own and does down those who insist that heterosexual families must remain the bedrock of a healthy society, they are going too far. And I had to criticise the guilty parties when the insecure self-obsession that some militant homosexuals have leads them to seek to use Britain as the armed wing of an international jihad for gay rights in the Middle East and Russia. To return to Ed West, who may or may not be gay, I don't know, but he's certainly at least up to his neck, if not some other part of his anatomy, in these neocon circles. For him to attack my criticism of the motives and tactics of Policy Exchange and the Henry Jackson Society without declaring his personal associations with them is extremely dishonest journalism. As for those who've replaced the old pro-Soviet treachery of a section of Britain's intellectual elite with a new drive to subordinate British interests to those of stateless global corporations and a section of the Israeli establishment, I point out that working to commit British treasure and British blood to other people's wars behind the backs of the British people is no less a crime than betraying British military secrets. The masters may have changed, but treason is still treason. In highlighting treason, I'm not, as Ed West would like to maintain, attacking the BNP's rivals. I'm simply doing what the British National Party is here to do: expose things that are bad for Britain and the British people and propose constructive alternatives. Getting dragged into other people's wars or being looted by corporations is obviously bad, and standing for peace is self-evidently good. It's as simple as that.
Many thanks, Nick, for your input today, and enjoy the rest of your well-deserved break. World News. The BBC asks whether Egypt and Iran, old enemies, are about to become new friends. Diplomatic relations between predominantly Sunni Egypt and predominantly Shia Iran were strained when Egypt sheltered the Shah following Iran's Islamic Revolution and then broke down completely when Egypt signed the peace treaty with Israel. Now Iran's Vice President Hamid Bagai has visited Cairo and Egypt's new President Mohamed Morsi is about to travel to Tehran. Egypt under former President Mubarak has united with other Sunni nations to act against Iran's spreading influence. President Morsi's move to repair ties with Tehran concerns many analysts, but most believe he will maintain a safe distance. Only time will tell. Thought for the day: the rise in hate crimes. Now my views on an ITV Tonight programme called Please Do Not Hate Me. Now I know my listeners think I'm a hardliner, and to some extent I am. I view myself as practical in an ever increasingly impractical society, so they may be surprised that I'm having a thought today on the disabled within our society in the UK. Now in my book there are many sorts of disabled, but three sections which spring to mind. 1. The permanently disabled, either physically or mentally, who are born that way. 2. The poor souls who have accidents or who are rendered disabled by intent or active service. And 3. The mentally challenged. This covers temporary breakdowns or learning disabilities. There may be many who fall in between these categories who are not covered. Now hate me though you might, 70 years ago there were not so many mentally challenged or those with learning disabilities. This could have been because several factors: a lower UK population, and I'm not going into the immigrant factor on this one yet. The fact that most people had family doctors, and if rich, these souls either didn't survive birth or were put away, and if poor, they rarely survived infancy. There was and still is a stigma given to producing what is seen then as an idiot, and indeed the term village idiot is well founded. These survivors were the butt of many cruelties and did not live long in the society. Now, with all the emphasis on giving the many more born challenged around us a life, whilst aborting healthy white children, our values are changing, sometimes not for the best. People are human and prone to human failings. That of bullying weaker individuals is one of them. It's the pack mentality. Whilst councils rush around building wheelchair-safe walkways, disabled access to practically everywhere, which makes a town look like it should be full of people in wheelchairs rushing hither and thither, there is a worrying increase in hate crimes against disabled people. In fact, around 100,000 cases for last year alone. Of these, 2,000 reported, only 500 had convictions. The tragic case of Fiona Pilkington and her severely disabled daughter stays on to haunt us. The case of Kevin Davis, mentally disabled and forced into slavery, another. The case of Gemma and what the police call mates murder. Now, Gemma was severely retarded. I hope you can still use that word because that is what it is. And she lived alone in a small flat. She made friends with another girl who was part of a gang. And this gang, one day, drunk and on cannabis, assaulted Gemma and then made her walk for 30 minutes to a railway track where they stripped her naked, assaulted her again and beat her and left her dead. They were seen on CCTV laughing and joking on their way back. They have received up to 22 years in jail, which you and I know they will not fully serve. This crime was premeditated and they should be hung. It would seem that the one thing the ITV report on these crimes did not acknowledge was the financial factor. As we in Europe and the UK get worse off and money and jobs become harder to acquire, the vulnerable in our society will suffer, the disabled, the very young and the elderly. Most disabled are now seen by the media as sponges on benefits. The papers are full of white, disabled jokers dancing around whilst receiving benefits for bad backs. They studiously ignore the immigrant disabled who gather large amounts of money from our state. In one council, a department given to helping the disabled in our community are inundated by requests from local Muslim Asian immigrant families for their disabled people, who have to have separate rooms and washing facilities as Muslims do not mix the sexes, and if questioned, turn very nasty and play the race card. They usually get what they want, not necessarily need, and this does not hit the papers. On the other side of the coin, there was a man who only became disabled after an accident at work, and his particular form of disability wanes and reoccurs. Some days he can mow the lawn, on others he's confined to bed. He cannot do a full-time job. His neighbour made his life hell with abuse upon abuse. It became so bad he contemplated suicide. However, he did not. He went to the police instead, who advised him to rig up a video camera. His neighbour was caught on it and arrested and fined. Now all this raised the question of euthanasia and whether abortions should be performed in questions of healthy fetuses. Not necessarily in this programme, but the actual thought of disablement. This is a huge debate, and the only statements I will make here are my personal views. I believe in the case of euthanasia that if a person of sound mind and extremely ill and terminal wants to end their lives, they should be allowed to do so. Now note the word allowed. This does not mean doctors, relations, judges or courts. It means that person alone can decide. If we are honest, how many people have met their maker a little earlier when overdosed or on a non-resuscitation list? In the days of old this happened all the time with an overdose of laudanum probably. One's body belongs to you, not the state and not your family. You. On the case of abortion where needed, I am totally for this one. Even going beyond the humanitarian views, we are grossly overpopulated as a world, and as a nation our mentally challenged and disabled souls seem to be on the increase, so why produce one more? On record, more families split up after such a birth, and one poor parent is left to cope with often a very badly disabled child who will not live long, or in some really sad cases ends up surviving their parents and being shoved into a home where they die anyway. It is all very sad, and I know there will be people who say that they have mildly affected Down's children and they are a joy, and to these people I say good, but this is my view and I would not have the patience to look after such a child. I'm a bit primitive here, rather tribal. Life is tough when you have all your faculties, and it is still survival of the fittest, I'm afraid. So with the Paralympics coming up, which I will not be watching, because although I have the greatest admiration for them, especially the limbless soldiers and people who have been born and fought their disabilities, it is not something I want to watch. We have a danger in the UK of combining a sense of morbid sentimentality with a brutal attitude of callousness towards our challenged. We laud them in the sports field, and yet we leave them alone in sink estates with the feral youths of today to be tormented. Another factor is that with our high immigration problem from the third world, it is a third world view to disregard disabled people. In India for years past, children had their limbs broken to go on the streets to beg. The Chinese put their aberrations out on the hill to die. Africans didn't let twins survive. The Middle East has an equally ambivalent attitude towards disabled, usually left to beg in the streets. The more of these people we have in our towns, we will find our newfound liberal views on those who are disabled will change, along with the monetary factors of life in the future. Will there be enough to go around? My youngest son used to work with young, mentally damaged people, and the many thousands of pounds spent in providing them with homes of around 4 to share, and one-on-one 24-hour care was costly. Their relations shared the cost, but there is no care in the community without money in the community, and I hope one day it will not come down to whoever looks normal will get the care and the rest will not. If a nationalist government brought back the death penalty and deported our foreign criminals before trial, all the money spent on the prisoners' comforts, remand homes, detention centres and legal fees could be redirected into giving a proper service to our challenge, not the challenge brought into our countries or born to first-generation immigrants. The care would be taken out of the community and given back to the state. Proper homes would be reopened, training centres and employment centres for the disabled. At the moment this government is busy shutting down all the employment factories for our disabled who can work, whilst paying huge amounts to China for bringing their crap into their country. Our foreign aid should be stopped and funds redirected to getting help for our people who need it. We in the UK are in a danger of double standards. Laugh at the idiot while encouraging him to run. Look, don't care. Feel, don't do. Laugh, don't cry. And finally, pigeon racers are left mystified after hundreds of pigeons fail to return home after being released in Thirsk, North Yorkshire. The pigeons, owned by a Scottish pigeon racing club, failed to make it back to Galashiels, Selkirkshire, over the area now dubbed the Bermuda Triangle. Only 13 out of 232 birds released returned successfully. Apparently this summer many more have gone missing over the same route and area. Keith Simpson of the East Cleveland Federation said pigeon racers across the region had all suffered massive losses since the season started in April, with many losing more than half their birds. Some fanciers are considering stopping flying their birds until they establish why so many fail to return. This presenter says there must be a lot of very hungry people around that area for such a large loss of pigeons. The RSPCA should investigate, as I personally love pigeons. They're a bit dim, but they're very affectionate. Perhaps if these hundreds were flying pigs, they would not have been taken for food. It's just a thought. This is an announcement. We will be off the air this coming Bank Holiday Monday as we're taking the day off. We'll be back in all our glory on Wednesday the 29th of August. I have also to apologise for the disappearance of World at 8 last Wednesday evening at 10 o'clock from the British National Party site. It did remain on YouTube and was reinstated later onto the party site Thursday. Don't forget we have the Reverend Robert West this Sunday. You have been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynne Mozar, and I and all the team at World at 8 wish you all a very happy and peaceful weekend. Take care and good night.